Let's take photos, my mother chirped at the company's 40th anniversary gala. The glass hall was lit like a studio. 10 minutes later, my stepfather's fist slammed into my ribs for refusing to sign off on adjusted numbers. Public relations had their caption ready, a unified family, a brilliant future. They didn't know I had a different caption, and a plan, that was set to detonate on the shareholder meeting floor. My name is Nora Keane. I'm 32 years old, and in the gleaming steel and glass heart of Greyfield, within the towering headquarters of North Lake Meridian, I am the head of risk analytics. Tonight, however, that title felt like a costume. The grand atrium was transformed for the company's 40th anniversary gala, a spectacle of shimmering light, champagne flutes chiming like 1,000 tiny bells, and the carefully orchestrated murmur of corporate triumph. Every surface reflected a distorted, elongated version of success. I watched myself in the polished marble floor, a sharp silhouette in a dark dress, my face a pale, unsmiling oval. This was my world, a world of numbers, projections, and the cold, hard calculus of consequence. A world I thought I understood. My mother, Mara, was the radiant center of the evening's primary orbit. She floated through the crowd, her arm linked possessively through that of her husband, my stepfather Victor Hale, the chief operating officer, and a significant shareholder. Victor wasn't just a man, he was an institution within North Lake Meridian. His presence was gravitational, pulling photographers and sycophants into his wake. They moved as one, a seamless unit of power and grace, the cameras flashing in a syncopated rhythm that felt both celebratory and predatory. Mara would laugh, a sound practice to be both musical and modest, and squeeze Victor's arm. The cameras loved it. They were selling a story, and it was a bestseller. Victor's orbit finally pulled me in. He steered Mara towards my small circle near the string quartet, his smile never faltering. His eyes were cold as the glass walls around us, the scent of his expensive cologne, a mix of sandalwood and something metallic, preceded him. Nora, Mara said, her voice a little too bright. Isn't this wonderful, 40 years? Victor has done such incredible things. Victor's smile tightened at the corners. He leaned in, his body blocking the view of a nearby photographer. His voice, a low, venomous whisper meant only for me, said, "The adjusted Q2 cash flow statement is still on your desk. I need it signed by morning." His gaze flickered towards the stage, where the CEO was preparing to speak. "Sign it, Nora, or you can forget about that promotion to director. It will simply disappear." I didn't flinch. I had spent the last 2 months buried in the data he wanted me to adjust. I had built the models, run the simulations, and followed the money down a rabbit hole so dark it had no bottom. I kept my voice just as low, a flat, sterile line of text in the glittering book of the evening. "No." His eyes narrowed, a flicker of disbelief, then rage. "What did you say?" I said no, I repeated, my own gaze unwavering. "The entry listed as Vendor Stream 7 is a legal and financial risk. It's a ghost entity funneling funds through a series of shell corporations. Signing that report would be fraud. I won't do it." For a split second, the mask of the affable COO slipped, revealing the predator beneath. But just as quickly, it was back in place, cemented by my mother's blissfully ignorant intervention. She saw the tension not as a threat, but as an opportunity for a perfect family moment. "Oh, you two, always talking shop," she chirped, her laughter tinkling. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong, and pulled me flush against Victor's side. The photographer, seeing his moment, raised his lens. "Let's take photos. A family picture." I was trapped, a prop in their stage play. The heat from Victor's body was a furnace beside me, his arm a rigid bar against my back. I could feel the coiled anger in his muscles. I smiled for the camera. It was the most difficult calculation I had ever performed. The flash was a blinding white explosion, momentarily erasing the gilded room and leaving me in a stark, silent void. Just then, the master of ceremonies, a man with a voice as smooth and artificial as the polished granite floors, boomed from the stage, and let's have a huge round of applause for our COO, Victor Hale, and his beautiful family, the Halekin family. A true inspiration and a testament to the values of North Lake Meridian. The room erupted. A wave of applause washed over us, a deafening endorsement of the lie we were performing. It felt like a physical blow, each clap a small hammer against my resolve. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a young PR assistant, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone. She was reviewing the social media post for the evening. I could clearly read the draft caption on her screen. Sitting under our freshly captured photo, waiting for the publish button, it read, "Family, Vision, Integrity." The hypocrisy was so profound, so grotesquely perfect, it almost made me laugh. Integrity. The word hung there, a ghost at the feast. The main lights on the stage dimmed as a musical act began, plunging the atrium into a more intimate, shadowy ambience. The spell was broken. The photographers moved on, seeking their next trophy. This was Victor's moment. His hand clamped around my upper arm like a vice. "You'll regret this," he hissed, his voice no longer a whisper. He didn't wait for a response. He propelled me from the glittering center of the room, past the flowing champagne fountains and clusters of laughing executives, toward a service corridor behind the main stage. It was a sterile, forgotten space, dimly lit by functional fluorescent strips. The triumphant music of the gala was a muffled, distant heartbeat. Here there were no cameras, no applause, no witnesses. It was a place where the carefully constructed image of North Lake Meridian ceased to exist and reality was permitted to surface. He shoved me against the cold concrete wall. The fabric of my dress did little to cushion the impact. "Who do you think you are?" he spat, his face inches from mine. The practiced smile was gone, replaced by a contorted mask of pure fury. "You think you can defy me in my own company, on a night celebrating everything I've built?" "I'm doing my job," I said, my voice shaking slightly, but my resolve holding. "My job is to identify risk, not to help you commit a crime." "Your job," he snarled, "is to do what you're told." And then it came, not a slap, which would have been loud, theatrical. This was something more intimate, more brutal. His fist drove into my side, a hard, compact explosion of force just below my rib cage. The air rushed out of my lungs in a silent gasp. Pain, sharp and blinding, radiated through my torso, so intense it felt hot. I doubled over, my forehead pressing against the cool, unforgiving wall as I fought for breath, my vision swimming with black spots. He leaned down, his breath hot against my ear. His voice, a low, menacing hiss that cut through the haze of pain, said, "Don't ruin tonight. You will sign that paper by morning, or I will personally escort you out of this building for good. Are we clear?" I couldn't speak. I could only nod, a pathetic, jerky movement. He straightened up, smoothing the front of his perfectly tailored tuxedo jacket. In the dim light, he was once again the composed, powerful COO. The transformation took less than a second. He turned and walked back toward the gala, melting back into the world of light and music, and leaving me alone in the shadows, gasping for air. Slowly, painfully, I straightened myself up, leaning heavily against the wall. Each breath was a sharp, stabbing reminder. My hand trembled as I brought it to my side. Feeling the deep, throbbing ache that was already beginning to bloom into what would surely be a spectacular bruise. But my other hand, my left hand, moved with a will of its own. My fingers found the small, cool metal object pinned to the lapel of my dress, almost hidden in the dark fabric. It was a tie pin, old, silver, elegantly simple. It had been my father's. He had been a man who believed in ledgers that balanced and truths that were non-negotiable. Victor had never paid it any mind, dismissing it as a piece of sentimental junk. I closed my fingers around it. The sharp edges of the pin pressed into my palm, a small grounding pain that cut through the larger agony in my side. In that cold, empty corridor, with the ghost of my father's integrity clutched in my hand and the fire of Victor's violence spreading through my ribs, the last piece of my own risk model clicked into place. My emergency protocol, my contingency, my real plan, the one that didn't involve a signature. I took a slow, deliberate breath and activated it. The pain in my side was a grounding anchor to the present, but my mind was already 2 months in the past. It hadn't started with a fist, but with a number, a single anomalous data point in a quarterly report that felt like a typo, a loose thread on a perfectly tailored suit. It was labeled Vendor Stream 7 in the clean, orderly universe of North Lake Meridian's financials. It was a ghost. My investigation began in the quiet hum of my office after midnight, long after the glass tower had emptied, fueled by black coffee and a relentless need for logic. I started pulling the thread. Vendor Stream 7 wasn't a single vendor. It was a designation for payments routed to 5 separate entities. 5 companies with generic, interchangeable names like Apex Logistical Solutions and Summit Global Services. They had no public profiles, no websites, no operational histories. They existed only on paper, registered to the same anonymous post office box in Delaware. It took another week of deep diving into incorporation records, cross-referencing databases that were supposed to be firewalled from each other, to find the nexus. All 5 shell companies were owned by a single opaque limited liability company, Hale Strategic Fund. A name that made the hair on my arm stand up. The pattern was the most damning part. The payments were not random, they were meticulously timed, executed in the final week of each fiscal quarter, just before the window closed for dividend announcements. The amounts were just large enough to nudge our earnings per share upward by a few crucial cents, the difference between meeting Wall Street's expectations and falling short. It wasn't just bookkeeping. It was a sophisticated mechanism for artificially inflating profit, a lie told in the language of numbers. My first attempt to raise the alarm was met with a wall of smiling, corporate-mandated denial. I sent a preliminary query to the Vice President of Finance, Dion Graves. Dion was Victor's niece, a woman who had ascended the corporate ladder with a speed that defied both gravity and merit. Her reply came not as a request for data or a promise to investigate, but as a single chilling directive in an email. It read, in its entirety: "Prioritize image over process, Nora. We have a narrative to maintain this quarter." The signature was a breezy digital flourish. The message was clear. The truth was inconvenient. The next escalation was a closed-door meeting with Victor himself. I had requested it under the guise of a routine quarterly risk overview. His 32nd floor corner office was a temple to his own success, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of Greyfield. He didn't ask me to sit. He stood by the window, a dark silhouette against the sprawling city lights, the picture of untouchable power. "I'm concerned about the Vendor Stream 7 disbursements," I began, keeping my voice steady, my language neutral and technical. "The structure suggests they are related party transactions designed to manage earnings." He turned slowly, a condescending smile playing on his lips. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed, like a teacher scolding a student who couldn't grasp a simple concept. "Nora, you're a brilliant analyst, but sometimes you get lost in the weeds. Think bigger picture. Think optics. We had some unforeseen expenses. Consider Vendor Stream 7 a simple consolidation of a cash advance to cover them. It's a temporary measure to beautify the report for the anniversary. It's good for morale. It's good for the stock. It's good for the family." He used the word family as if it were a shield, a justification for any sin. I left his office with the unspoken threat hanging in the air-conditioned silence. My path was forking. I could be a good analyst or I could be a good daughter. That night, I built the risk model. It was a stark, binary equation. Scenario A, I signed the report, burying vendor stream 7. The company enjoys a brief, artificial stock bump. We celebrate the anniversary, and we wait for the inevitable knock on the door from the Securities and Exchange Commission. A knock that would bring the entire house of cards down, likely resulting in massive fines, shareholder lawsuits, and potential criminal charges. Scenario B, I refuse to sign and blow the whistle. The truth comes out. The stock takes an immediate, painful hit. The gala's triumphant narrative is shattered. Victor's legacy is tarnished. But the company, the actual entity made up of thousands of employees who had nothing to do with this, might survive the surgery. It was a choice between a lie that felt good and a truth that hurt. I chose the truth. I drafted a formal memorandum, a 14-page, ice-cold document detailing the entire scheme. It was filled with transaction logs, corporate registry numbers, and flowcharts. It was irrefutable. I cited the specific articles of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that were being violated. I concluded with a recommendation for an immediate internal audit by an independent committee. I sent it directly to Victor and carped Dion, creating a formal record that could not be ignored. It was returned to my inbox less than an hour later. Victor hadn't even bothered to write a response. He had simply forwarded my own email back to me with a note from his executive assistant, Mr. Hale notes that the tone of this memorandum is not appropriate for the current celebratory season. Please revise and resubmit with a more collaborative and positive framing after the anniversary events. The celebratory season. That was the moment my compliance ended and my contingency plan began. That night, I went home and opened the encrypted drive on my personal laptop. I called the folder the Vault. For the past 5 years, ever since Victor's temper had first shown its true colors in the privacy of our home, I had been building it. It wasn't just a collection of files, it was my insurance policy. Inside were scanned logs of every suspicious transaction I'd ever flagged, copies of contracts with hidden addendums, and email chains that had been conveniently lost from the main server. I added my vendor stream 7 memo and the dismissive rejection. Then I added my newest and perhaps most valuable piece of evidence. 2 weeks ago, I had seen a Slack conversation on a shared marketing screen. It was Dion messaging the head of PR. I had taken a quick, surreptitious photo with my phone. The message read, "Need to amplify the family angle for the anniversary. Let's do a dedicated shoot with Victor, Mara, and Nora. Please draft some caption options focused on family, vision, integrity." This is a core part of the brand replication campaign for Q4. The brand replication campaign. They weren't just a family, they were a marketing strategy. The photo, the smiles, the applause, it was all inextricably linked to the fraudulent numbers. One was the public face of the other. I dragged the screenshot into a new subfolder in the Vault. I had another file to add to it, a file that wasn't a spreadsheet or a document. It was an audio file, still waiting to be recorded. I created a placeholder for it, a blank digital space awaiting its moment. I typed out the file name, letting my fingers hover over the keys. Caption drafted final truth move. I used the video file extension because what I planned to capture was more than just sound, it was a whole picture. 10 years ago, my father died of a sudden heart attack. He was an engineer, a quiet, meticulous man who believed that things should be built to last and that the truth had a simple, elegant structure. The day after the funeral, my mother had started cleaning out his closet, eager to erase his presence. I had salvaged a small box of his belongings. Inside, Nestled amongst old coins and cufflinks, was his favorite silver tie pin. But it wasn't just a tie pin. My father, a man with a quiet paranoia about corporate espionage from his own career, had it custom-made. It was a miniature, high-fidelity digital audio recorder. The activation switch was a tiny, almost invisible nub along the edge. It was a secret I had kept for a decade. It was the one variable Victor Hale, a man who saw people as assets and liabilities, could never have factored into his cold equations. He had no idea that the sentimental trinket he'd always ignored was, in fact, a weapon. The cold of the concrete wall seeped through the thin fabric of my dress, a chilling counterpoint to the blossoming heat in my side. My breath came in shallow gasps. Ragged bursts. A high-pitched ringing filled my ears, a sound like stressed metal blocking out the muffled thrum of the party, just a few dozen feet away. For a moment, the world was reduced to this, the stark fluorescent light, the gritty texture of the wall against my cheek, and the radiating epicenter of pain from Victor's fist. But beneath the physical chaos, a profound and icy calm was settling over my mind. My body was in shock, but my thoughts were clear, linear, and brutally efficient. The recorder was still running. My fingers, clumsy and trembling, found the tiny switch on my father's tie pin. I clicked it off. The silence that followed felt absolute. I knew with the certainty of a proven theorem that the microphone had captured it all. It had recorded the sound of my back hitting the wall. It had recorded Victor's venomous, spittle-flecked threats. And most importantly, it had recorded the 7 words that constituted a direct, actionable threat, a violation of corporate policy and federal law. Sign it, or I'll have you out of this company. That sentence, captured in pristine digital audio, had just become the cornerstone of my entire case. I pushed myself off the wall, using my hand to brace the agonizing ache in my ribs. I walked slowly and deliberately out of the corridor, and back toward the edge of the gala's glittering orbit. No one noticed me, they were all watching the stage, captivated by the performance. I slipped my company-issued phone from my clutch, my thumb moving across the screen with practiced precision. I pulled up my encrypted messaging app and found the contact labeled with a simple, anonymous, Rhea Palmer. She was the one lawyer in the city I knew who operated with the quiet, lethal precision of a surgeon, an independent compliance counsel I had retained privately 6 weeks ago. When I first understood where this path was leading, I didn't type a word. I sent her a single emoji, the one we had agreed upon, a paper clip. It was the digital equivalent of pulling a fire alarm. The reply came back in less than 10 seconds. It was as devoid of emotion as my own message. Send via secure drop. Preserve all original EXIF and metadata. Await confirmation. Preserve the metadata, the digital fingerprint, time, date, location, the very soul of verifiable evidence. I needed one more piece. I turned and walked toward the opulent mirror-lined restrooms. Instead of going in, I stopped in the small, empty vestibule, a space bathed in soft, forgiving light. I angled my body toward the wall, lifted the edge of my dress just enough to expose the skin over my ribs. The bruise was already beginning to bloom, a sickening, mottled constellation of purple and red against my pale skin. It was ugly. It was proof. I raised my company phone, the same device North Lake Meridian paid for, and opened the camera. I took 3 clear, steady pictures. The phone's software, designed for corporate compliance and data retention, automatically saved every photo taken on the device to a secure, time-stamped internal cloud server. I knew the protocol. The act was logged. The EXIF data would read, image captured. West 2 Corridor, Annex Time 2041. The image of the bruise was now an official, unalterable company record. I smoothed my dress down, my face a mask of composure, and re-entered the gala. I found my mother, who was holding court with the wife of a board member, laughing at something that wasn't funny. I touched her arm lightly. "I have a terrible stomach ache," I said, my voice carefully pitched to sound weak, but not alarming. "I think the salmon mousse might have been off. I'm going to head home." Mara's face clouded with fleeting, cosmetic concern. "Oh, darling, are you sure you should stay for the CEO's speech?" "I can't," I said. "It's bad. Please make my apologies to Victor." The name tasted like ash in my mouth. She waved me off, already turning back to her conversation, the minor inconvenience of her daughter's health already forgotten. I didn't go home. I took the elevator, not down to the lobby, but up to the 31st floor, my office. The cavernous space was dark and silent, a ghost of its daytime self. The only light was the ambient glow of the city through the vast windows. I didn't turn on the overheads. I sat down at my desk, the familiar comfort of my chair a small solace, and woke my computer. My fingers flew across the keyboard. This was my element here. There were no emotions, only data. I opened the secure server and began to pull the files. First, the transaction logs for vendor stream 7. I exported every single entry, a clean, damning spreadsheet of dates, amounts, and authorization codes. Each one was approved by either Dion or Victor himself. Next, I pulled up Dion's email, the one dismissing my concerns about the tone being inappropriate for the celebratory season. I saved it as a PDF, the headers and server path fully visible. Then came the schema, the corporate ownership chart I had spent a week building. A digital spiderweb that showed the 5 shell companies flowing directly into the Hale Strategic Fund. I found the public registration for Victor's fund, which listed his home address, our home address, as its place of business. I placed the 2 documents side by side in the folder. The connection was no longer an inference. It was a map. My last stop was the company's marketing server. I navigated to the PR team's shared drive, to the folder for the 40th anniversary gala, and there it was, the draft post, the photo of me, my mother, and Victor smiling our perfect, fraudulent smiles, and beneath it, the caption waiting to be published to the world, family, vision, integrity. I downloaded the entire package, the high-resolution photo, the metadata, the draft text. I dropped it into the vault right next to the picture of my bruised skin. The juxtaposition was sickening and perfect. Now I had the complete package, a story told in 3 parts. The financial crime, the corporate cover-up, and the physical threat used to enforce it. All of it was digital, time-stamped, and verifiable. I opened a new encrypted browser window and navigated to a URL I had memorized. It was a secure, anonymous portal maintained by the federal government for corporate whistleblowers. I filled out the form, my fingers moving with a detached, mechanical rhythm. I cited Section 806 of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, the provision that protects employees who report fraud. I uploaded my entire evidence folder, the vault, as a single encrypted zip file. The progress bar crept across the screen, a slow green line signifying the point of no return. When it was done, the site generated a long alphanumeric string, my tracking code, my receipt. I copied it, saved it, and closed the browser. It was done. Victor Hale was no longer just my stepfather. He was case number 78 Alpha 3B9. One final step, the kill switch. A whistleblower report could take weeks or months to be acted upon. I didn't have that long. I needed to detonate this from the inside. I opened my corporate calendar. I couldn't request a meeting with Helena Voss, the formidable and fiercely independent chair of the Audit Committee, through normal channels. Victor's executive assistant monitored all calendar requests to the board and would flag it instantly. So, I used the system's direct scheduling feature, a tool reserved for high-priority IT alerts. I created a new appointment on Helena's calendar for the following morning. I set the time for 7:10 a.m., an odd, specific time that would bypass any block scheduling and signal its urgency. The subject line was blank. The location was a neutral conference room on the 28th floor. And in the invitation body, I pasted only the long string of characters from the whistleblower portal, my tracking code. I hit send. The invitation vanished into the corporate server. A digital missile heading for the one person in the company with the power and the integrity to act. I leaned back in my chair. The pain in my side, a dull, constant throb. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a vast, empty calm. The gala was still going on 40 floors below me, a celebration of lies. But up here, in the silent dark of my office, the truth was now armed and waiting. The conference room on the 32nd floor was a glass box suspended in the early morning sky. The sun was just beginning to burn through the grey-filled mist, casting long, distorted shadows across the polished mahogany table. It was a room designed for transparency, but it felt like an interrogation chamber. I had been seated for precisely 4 minutes when they walked in. Victor led the way, flanked by Dion Graves and a pale, sweating man I recognized as Mason Lark, the head of public relations. They didn't look like executives arriving for a meeting, they looked like a procession. Victor was the only one smiling. It was a practiced, patient smile, the kind a father gives a hysterical child. He took the seat directly across from me, the chairman's seat, and folded his hands. Dion and Mason sat on either side of him, a pair of nervous bookends. Nora, Victor began, his voice a low, reasonable purr. I'm glad we could do this. Just the 4 of us. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding, and I want to clear the air before this goes any further. He leaned forward, his expression a careful performance of paternal concern. Families don't sue families. We don't air our dirty laundry. Whatever your concerns are, you're overreacting. We can solve this right here, right now. I didn't say a word. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small black USB flash drive. It was nondescript, identical to thousands of others in the building. I placed it in the center of the vast, empty table. The soft click of plastic on wood was the only sound in the room. It was impossibly loud. Victor's eyes narrowed on the object. What's this? More of your spreadsheets, I said. My voice was flat and empty of emotion. I tapped the surface of the table, and the room's integrated audio-visual system came to life. I selected the drive. You asked about family, Victor. Let's talk about family. And then I hit play. His own voice filled the sterile, soundproofed room. It was not the calm, reasonable tone he was using now. This was the voice from the corridor, raw and guttural, stripped of its corporate polish. The audio was crystal clear, the slight echo of the concrete walls, my own sharp, pained gasp for air, and then the words hanging in the air like poison. Don't ruin tonight. You will sign that paper by morning, or I will personally escort you out of this building for good. Are we clear? The silence that followed the recording was heavier, more suffocating than before. Mason Lark looked like he was going to be physically ill. Dion's face was a blotchy, furious red, a stark contrast to her pristine white blazer. Victor's smile had vanished, leaving behind a rigid, bloodless mask of fury. Victor stared at the small black drive, as if it were a venomous snake. Dion found her voice first. It was a high, reedy squeak. That's fake. It's obviously been edited. That's a deep fake audio. She's manufacturing evidence. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on Victor. With another tap on the table surface, I brought up a second file on the large screen at the end of the room. It was a mess of code and numbers, meaningless to the untrained eye. This, I said, my voice cutting through the tension, is the file's checksum log from the moment it was created last night. And this is the corresponding hash, timestamped by Northlake's own internal server clock at 20:43, pulled from the recorder sync log this morning. The file is immutable, verifiable, untouched. Mason Lark flinched as if he'd been struck. He started stammering, his hands trembling so badly he had to hide them under the table. The caption, the social media post, it was only a draft, a placeholder. It was never published. We never posted it. He was looking at Victor, pleading. He was trying to minimize, to contain the damage to a single unpublished social media gaffe. I nodded slowly, a gesture of mock agreement. Good, I said, my gaze sweeping across all three of them. That's very good, because we are going to post a caption. Just not asterisk your asterisk version. That was when Victor knew. He knew this wasn't about a negotiation anymore. The pretense of the concerned father evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard calculus of a cornered executive. He leaned forward, dropping his voice so low it was almost a whisper, a conspiratorial rumble of pure pragmatism. All right, he said, his eyes locking with mine. What do you want? Is that it? Let's cut the theatrics. What's your price? Money, a promotion. You want to be director. Fine. You can be vice president. Just name it. The offer hung in the air, obscene in its simplicity. He truly believed it was a number he could write on a check, a title he could bestow, a problem he could buy his way out of. I let the silence stretch for a long, painful moment before I answered. I want the truth, I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. I want the full, unredacted truth about Vendor Stream 7 presented by me to the Audit Committee. And I want Vendor Stream 7, and every shell company associated with it shut down permanently today. A flicker of something, disbelief, maybe even fear, crossed Victor's face. He started to laugh, a dry, humorless bark. The Audit Committee. You'll never get in front of them. I'll have this meeting buried before you even. His words were cut short by the sound of the heavy glass door clicking open. All three of them turned. I did not. I already knew who it was. Helena Voss, the chair of the Audit Committee, stepped into the room. She was a woman in her late 60s, with a severe haircut, and an expression that suggested she had never been impressed by anything in her life. She moved with an aura of absolute, unshakable authority, and walking just a step behind her was Rhea Palmer, my lawyer. Her face was calm and neutral, her briefcase held firmly in her hand. The color drained from Victor's face. He looked at Helena, as if she were an apparition. Dion sank back in her chair, suddenly looking very small. Victor shot to his feet, his composure shattered. He pointed a trembling finger at Helena. What is this? What are you doing here? This is a private internal meeting. Who let her in? Helena Voss did not even look at him. Her cool grey eyes met mine across the table. She gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Then she turned her gaze to Victor, her voice as crisp and cold as the morning air outside the glass. The company bylaws, she said, stepping fully into the room and letting the door close with a soft, final thud behind her. I invited myself. The atmosphere in the glass box didn't just shift, it inverted. The air grew thin and cold. Victor, Dion, and Mason were no longer my accusers. They were specimens under a microscope, and Helena Voss was the one with her hand on the focus knob. Helena moved to the head of the table, but did not sit. She remained standing, a silent, powerful sentinel. Rhea took a position near the door, a quiet observer whose very presence was a legal barrier. Nora, Helena said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. You requested this meeting. You have the floor. I took a steadying breath. The pain in my side, a dull rhythmic pulse. I tapped the console on the table, dismissing the checksum log from the screen. In its place, I projected my final exhibit. It wasn't a spreadsheet, or a block of text. It was a flowchart, a stark, brutal diagram of the money's journey, rendered in clean lines and emotionless boxes. This, I began, my voice as clinical as the image on the screen, is vendor stream 7. I used the laser pointer embedded in the table's console. Its red dot was a single drop of blood on the white screen. The process begins here, with discretionary funds diverted from North Lake's operational budget. I traced the flow. These funds are then channeled, in meticulously timed payments that coincide with the end of each fiscal quarter, into 5 separate corporate entities. I pointed to the names in the boxes: Apex, Summit, Meridian Global. These entities have no employees, no assets, and no operational footprint. They are shells existing only as legal fictions, registered to a single P.O. box in Wilmington. I paused, letting the weight of the information settle in the silent room. Victor was rigid, his knuckles white where he gripped the arms of his chair. Dion was staring at the screen, her mouth slightly agape, as if seeing the raw mechanics of her crime laid bare for the first time. From these 5 shells, I continued, tracing the lines that converged into a single point. The red dot rested on the last box at the bottom of the chart, the Hale Strategic Fund LLC. I turned my gaze from the screen and looked directly at Victor. A private family fund registered to your home address with you and my mother as the sole principals. Over the last 2 years, $18.7 million have made this journey, an amount sufficient to artificially inflate our earnings per share by an average of 3 to 5 cents per quarter, ensuring executive performance bonuses were met and dividend expectations were satisfied. I turned off the laser pointer. The chart remained on the screen, a silent, damning testament. Rhea Palmer stepped forward, holding a tablet. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. For the record, she stated, her tone that of a lawyer reading a deposition, I would like to direct the committee's attention to North Lake Meridian's corporate bylaws, Article 4, Section 3B. It states, all transactions with related parties, including but not limited to entities owned or controlled by executive officers, or their immediate family members, must be fully disclosed to the Audit Committee and approved by a majority of disinterested directors. The transactions Ms. Keene has just outlined were never disclosed. She looked up from the tablet, her eyes briefly meeting Helena's. This is not a simple accounting irregularity. This is a profound, willful violation of internal controls and a breach of fiduciary duty to the company's shareholders. Helena's expression didn't change, but her focus sharpened. She turned her attention to the pale, trembling figure of Mason Lark. Mr. Lark, she said, her voice dangerously soft. The public image of this company is your responsibility. I want a full, unredacted log of every draft, edit, and comment related to all social media content for last night's gala. I want to see every version of every caption that was considered. Have it pull the server history and deliver it to my office within the hour. Mason's face, already pale, turned the color of ash. But drafts, they are just brainstorming, he stammered. It was Dion who cracked. The pressure was too much. She lunged forward in her chair, her voice rising with panicked indignation. This is ridiculous. It was a temporary measure, a simple cash movement to ensure the company looked strong for the anniversary. We just needed to get through this quarter. The admission, raw and unfiltered, hung in the air. The room went dead silent. Helena turned her head slowly to look at Dion. A faint, chilling smile touched her lips. Thank you for confirming the motive, Ms. Graves, she said. Your candor is noted. Victor saw the last of his defenses crumbling. The legal argument was lost. The process argument was lost. He had one card left to play. He turned his gaze on Helena, his expression shifting from rage to one of deep paternal sorrow. He gestured toward me. Helena, You have to understand, he said, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. This is a family matter, a disagreement. Nora is my daughter. She's young, ambitious. She's misinterpreted things. She's upset about a promotion. This is personal. The attempt to drag the proceedings back into the murky, subjective realm of family was his final desperate gambit. I met his gaze across the table. The image of his fist, the searing pain in my side, the cold of the corridor wall, it all coalesced into a single point of crystalline clarity. You are my mother's husband, I said, my voice low and steady, each word a carefully placed stone. My signature is not a family asset, and it is not for sale. The last of the air seemed to leave the room. The distinction was absolute. I was not his daughter. I was the head of risk analytics, and he was not my father. He was a criminal. That was all Helena Voss needed to hear. She turned to Ria. Ms. Palmer, please ensure a copy of your client's findings, along with the minutes of this meeting, are delivered to our independent auditors at KPMG by noon today. She then looked at Victor, her voice now ringing with the full, unassailable authority of her position. Effective immediately, I am signing an executive order to freeze all payments designated for vendor Stream 7, or any of its associated entities pending a full forensic audit. All access to these accounts by you and Ms. Graves is hereby revoked. She swiveled her gaze to Mason. Mr. Lark, you are to place an indefinite hold on all external corporate communications. The unpublished post from last night is to be deleted from all servers. Any and all content, past, present, or future, that references the Hale family in a corporate capacity is to be suspended until further notice. It was a systematic dismantling. In less than 2 minutes, Helena had decapitated Victor's fraudulent operation, quarantined the narrative, and called in the executioners. He was powerless. He stared at her, then at me, his face a mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. The powerful COO was gone, replaced by a cornered old man who had just lost everything. He let out a low, guttural sound, a half laugh, half growl. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. You're a fool, he whispered, the words rasping from his throat. You've destroyed yourself. I pushed my chair back from the table, the legs scraping softly against the floor. I stood up, feeling the full, aching protest of the bruise on my ribs. I looked down at him, at the man who had built an empire on lies and enforced it with his fists. I didn't destroy anything, I said, my voice clear and ringing in the silent, sunlit room. I published the truth. Helena's orders had landed with the finality of a gavel strike. Mason Lark, looking utterly broken, reached a trembling hand for his laptop, his fingers hovering over the trackpad. He was about to execute the command to delete the draft, to scrub the lie from the server, to bury the evidence of their intended deception. Wait, I said. Every head in the room turned toward me. The word hung in the air, a single sharp note of defiance against the agreed-upon silence. Mr. Lark, I said, my voice steady. Don't delete it. He stared at me, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. He glanced at Helena, seeking permission. Helena's gaze was fixed on me, her expression unreadable, but intensely focused. She gave a single, sharp nod. With a shaking hand, Mason clicked open the social media management console. The draft post filled the large screen at the end of the room, a grotesque monument to the night before. There was the photo, Victor, Mara, and me, a trinity of corporate perfection. And there beneath it was the caption, a lie waiting to be born. Family, vision, integrity, celebrating 40 years of North Lake Meridian's enduring values. Seeing it there, projected 10 feet high, made the acid rise in my throat. It was a digital tombstone for a truth they had tried to murder. Ms. Keene, Helena said, her voice cutting through the silence. You have an alternative proposal? I do, I replied. I walked to the head of the table, took the wireless keyboard from in front of Mason, and began to type. I didn't delete the post. I began to edit it. First, the image. I clicked Replace Media. A file selection window popped up. I navigated to a folder on the secure drive I had prepared that morning. It contained a single file. I selected it and hit Upload. The image on the screen changed. It was still a photo from the gala, taken at the same moment from a slightly different angle. The lighting was the same. The champagne flutes and smiling guests in the background were the same. But this version wasn't tightly cropped around our smiling faces. This version was wider, and in the polished dark marble of a column on the far right of the frame, a distorted reflection was now visible. It was a dark, open doorway, a glimpse into the sterile, fluorescent-lit service corridor, the West 2 corridor. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable unless you were looking for it. A ghost in the machine. Next, the caption. My fingers moved over the keyboard. Deleting the hollow, corporate-approved words. I typed my own. The clicking of the keys was the only sound in the room. Each keystroke, a small, sharp report. Integrity means telling the truth when the camera turns away. The sentence sat alone on the screen, stark and uncompromising. Then I added the attachments. I uploaded 2 small, linked files to the post. The first was a digitally signed certificate. Its text was simple. Original media timestamp 2041. The second was a hyperlink. Its display text read, a commitment to transparency. The link led to the public landing page for the Sarbanes-Oxley whistleblower program, directly to the portal where a report filed under case number 78 Alpha 3B9 could be tracked. The report itself was sealed, its contents anonymous, but its existence was now a matter of public record, inextricably tied to this post, this image, this moment in time. I was finished. The new post, my post, was complete. The story was no longer about a happy family. It was about the reflection in the marble, about what happens in the unlit corridors, about the precise minute a crime was committed. I stepped back from the keyboard. The silence was absolute. Victor was staring at the screen, his face a mottled canvas of rage and confusion. He hadn't processed it yet. He was still trying to understand how the weapon had been turned against him. Helena Voss looked at Rhea Palmer. Counsel, your assessment. Rhea stepped forward, her eyes scanning the text on the screen. She read it once, then twice. Her expression was clinical, detached. The statement is one of principle, not a direct accusation against any specific individual. The attached timestamp is verifiable company data. The link is to a public government resource. Legally, it is defensible. It is not liable. It is a declaration of corporate values. Helena's gaze shifted from Rhea to the screen and finally to me. Her eyes held mine for a long, silent moment. In them I saw not approval, not sympathy, but a cold, hard recognition. She saw the weapon I had built, and she understood its purpose. She turned to Mason Lark, whose face was now slick with sweat. Publish it, she said. The word was a death sentence. Mason's hand trembled over the mouse. He looked at Victor, a last desperate plea for a counter-command that would never come. Then he looked at Helena. Her face was granite. He took a shaky breath, closed his eyes for a second, and clicked. The screen refreshed. A small green banner appeared at the top, post successfully published to all channels. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The world held its breath, and then the storm broke. The first sound was a single, sharp ping from Mason's laptop, a Slack notification from the financial news channel, then another, and another, a cascade of pings, a digital hailstorm on the screen. The notifications began to pop up in the corner, a frantic, overlapping chorus. Bloomberg terminal alert. Unusual social media activity from NLM. Wall Street Journal. North Lake Meridian COO hails family photo linked to whistleblower site. Reuters. Caption drafted, now trending in North America finance sector. The sound of Mason's phone vibrating on the table was a furious, buzzing roar like a trapped hornet. Then Dion's phone began to vibrate, then Victor's. The room was filled with the frantic electronic scream of the outside world rushing in. The glass box could no longer contain the truth. It had been broadcast to the planet in less time than it takes to draw a breath. 18 seconds. That's all it took. 18 seconds to dismantle a 40-year legacy. 18 seconds to turn a celebration into a crucifixion. Through the digital noise, I heard Mason Lark whisper, his voice filled with a kind of terrified awe. My God, he breathed, staring at the screen as if it were the face of a new, terrible God. We just chose the truth. I turned my gaze away from the screen, away from the evidence of the fire I had started. I looked at Victor. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at me. The carefully constructed facade of the powerful COO, the charming family man, had been burned away. All that was left was a raw, primal rage. His face was pale, his lips a thin, bloodless line, but it was his eyes that held me. They were shot through with broken blood vessels, a web of crimson against the white. For the first time, I saw a profound and terrible pain in Victor's eyes. And for the first time, it was not a reflection of my own. The digital storm raging on their phones was a symphony of their own destruction. But Victor Hale was not a man to surrender to a force he couldn't see. His instincts were primal, rooted in the physical assertion of power. He reacted not to the data, but to the challenger in his cage. He lunged for the intercom console on the table, his hands slamming down on the button for building security. Get me security now, he roared into the speaker, his voice a raw, ragged tear in the fabric of the room's tension. There is an unauthorized individual on the 32nd floor. I want her access credentials revoked immediately. Escort her from the building. He was looking at me, his eyes promising a swift physical resolution. For a split second, the old fear, the conditioned response to his authority, flickered within me. But it was extinguished just as quickly by Helena Voss. She didn't raise her voice. She simply spoke into the same open channel. Security, she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. This is Helena Voss, chair of the audit committee. Stand down. Ms. Keane is an employee of this company and is, as of 0710 this morning, under the full and legally binding protection of the North Lake Meridian Whistleblower Policy. Article 2, Section 7. She paused, letting her words sink into the building's very infrastructure. Any action taken against her will be considered retaliatory, and will be met with immediate legal consequences. That is all. She released the button. The intercom went silent. Victor stared at her, dumbfounded. He had tried to use the system as a weapon, only to find the locks had been changed. He had no more keys. Dion, a creature of the digital age, chose a different weapon. Her face contorted with a desperate, venomous fury. She snatched her laptop and began typing with frantic speed. She was trying to get ahead of the narrative, to poison the well before anyone else could drink from it. Less than a minute later, my own laptop, which had been sitting dormant, pinged with a new email notification. It was a company-wide blast sent from Dion's executive account. The subject line was in all caps, Urgent Data Integrity Alert. The body of the email was a short, panicked screed claiming that a junior analyst, she didn't use my name, but everyone knew, had fabricated risk models and falsified data in a misguided attempt to damage the company and its leadership. It was a clumsy, desperate lie. It lasted for exactly 45 seconds. A second company-wide email appeared in everyone's inbox. This one was from the Chief Technology Officer. Subject, Urgent Data Integrity Alert. Body, all data presented by the Risk Analytics Department this morning has been verified against the company's immutable server logs. All checksums are validated. All files are authentic and unaltered. The integrity of our data is secure. Helena had anticipated it. She had already looped in the CTO. Dion had not just been refuted, she had been publicly, systemically fact-checked in real time. The next attack came from the outside. My phone buzzed with a news alert from a second-tier financial blog, a known mouthpiece for corporate spin run by an old college friend of Victor's. The headline was Pure Damage Control, North Lake Meridian Weather's internal disinformation campaign, as anniversary gala highlights strong family leadership. The article painted me as a disgruntled employee, hinting at personal and professional jealousies. Rhea Palmer, who had been silent until now, read the headline on her phone, her expression unchanged. She tapped a few commands into her tablet. A cease and desist letter citing defamation and tortious interference has just been delivered to that blog's legal counsel, she announced to the room, her voice calm and even. I expect a full retraction, and a public apology will be posted within the hour. They were firing blanks. Every weapon they had, corporate authority, digital slander, media manipulation, was being dismantled before it could even be properly aimed. The machine I had set in motion was not just attacking, it was defending, moving faster, and with more precision than they could have ever imagined. Victor staggered back from the table, his face ashen. He looked defeated, shrunken. The rage was gone, replaced by a hollow, desperate despair. He fell back on his last, most pathetic defense. He tried to make me the villain in a story of his own pain. Mara, he rasped, his voice cracking. Your mother. This is going to destroy her. I didn't answer him. I turned and looked out of the vast glass wall of the conference room. 32 floors below, the plaza in front of the building was beginning to fill with morning commuters. And standing near the main entrance, bathed in the cool morning light, was my mother. She had her phone in her hand, her head bent down, scrolling through the very news alerts that were defining the end of her husband's career, but her face was blank. Her shoulders were not slumped in grief. Her posture was the same as it always was, a careful, studied neutrality. I turned back to the room. You want to talk about protecting my mother? I said, my voice dangerously quiet. I reached for the small USB drive still sitting on the table. I inserted it back into the console. Let's listen to one more file. I hit play. It was another recording from the type-in, captured a month ago, during that meeting in Victor's office, where he first told me to beautify the report. His voice, smug and self-assured, filled the room. Think of it as an advance on our bonuses, Nora. A little creative accounting to make sure we all hit our performance targets. I'm not going to lose out on a 7-figure bonus because of some temporary cash flow hiccup. Nobody gets hurt, and everybody wins, especially me. The final piece, the motive. It wasn't about protecting the company. It wasn't about weathering a tough quarter. It was about his bonus. It was about greed, pure and simple. Helena Voss had heard enough. She produced a tablet from her own briefcase, and, with a few swift strokes of a stylus, signed a document on the screen. Victor Hale, Dion Graves, she announced, her voice resonating with finality. Pursuant to the authority vested in me by the North Lake Meridian Board of Directors, I am hereby placing you both on immediate and indefinite administrative leave pending the results of a full independent forensic audit. Your access to all company systems, properties, and accounts is revoked. Effective now, she looked up. Our head of European operations, Mr. Sterling, will assume the role of interim COO until this matter is resolved." As she spoke, a notification popped up on the large screen at the end of the room. An automated feed from the corporate HR system, disciplinary action logged, v. Hale, suspension. Disciplinary action logged, D. Graves, suspension. The system had already processed her command. They were, for all intents and purposes, already gone. The two uniformed security guards who had been standing discreetly outside the glass door for the past 10 minutes, summoned not by Victor, but by Helena, did not move toward me. They remained at attention. Their purpose now clear, they were not here to remove me, they were here to ensure that Victor and Dion left without incident. No one dared to touch me. I was no longer an analyst, I was a protected witness. The power dynamic in the room had been irrevocably, completely reversed. I walked back to my chair, my movement slow and deliberate. I reached up to the lapel of my blazer and unclasped my father's tie pin. I held it in my palm for a moment, the cool, familiar weight of the silver, a grounding presence. I thought of the spot just below my collarbone where Victor had gripped my jacket last night. His fingers digging into me as he steered me toward the dark corridor. Carefully, I pushed the pin through the fabric of my own blazer, right over that same spot. The sharp point slid through the material, clean and precise. I fastened the clasp behind it. It sat there, a small silver shield, over the place where he had laid his hand on me. It was no longer just a memory of my father, it was a medal, a warning, a declaration that the truth, once armed, was the only authority that mattered. The shareholder meeting was not held in the grand auditorium. It was convened in the boardroom on the 40th floor, a sterile white space designed to feel like the inside of a cloud. The time was exactly 9 a.m. Through the soundproofed glass walls, I could see the distant, silent flashes of cameras from the press corps corralled in the lobby far below. They were sharks circling a cage, waiting for blood in the water. The room was cold. The air conditioning was a low, constant hum, a sterile breath against the skin. I sat at a long white table, a single microphone before me, its metal neck cool and unyielding to the touch. Helena Voss sat at the head of the table, a figure carved from granite. On the other side sat the board members and the company's largest institutional investors. Their faces were a gallery of grim, calculated neutrality. Victor and Dion were not present. They were, in the sanitized language of the official notice, on leave and not required to attend. Helena leaned forward, her hands clasped on the white surface of the table. She did not tap the microphone to test it. She simply began to speak, her voice filling the room with an unnerving, unamplified clarity. "We are convened this morning for an extraordinary session," she began, her eyes sweeping across the assembled faces. "There are times when the routine duties of governance are insufficient. There are times when a threat to the fundamental integrity of this company requires a direct and decisive response." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Financial security is not a matter of optimistic projection. It is a mandate for absolute transparency. We are here today to address a failure of that mandate. Ms. Keane will now present her findings. I did not stand. I remained seated, a small, still point in the vast white room. With a click of the mouse beside me, the large screen behind Helena came to life. There were only 6 slides. The first was the flowchart of Vendor Stream 7, the zigzagging path of the money from North Lake's accounts to the Hale Strategic Fund, a river of deceit drawn in stark black and white. The second slide showed the side-by-side corporate registrations, the shell companies and Victor's private fund, all linked by the same addresses, the same hidden architecture of fraud. The third was a risk analysis matrix. The columns were labeled financial impact, legal exposure, and reputational damage. The color-coded boxes were all deep, alarming red. In the corner, I had included the relevant articles of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that had been violated. The fourth slide was a timeline, a simple, brutal line connecting the dates of the fraudulent transfers with the dates of the company's quarterly earnings announcements and executive bonus payouts. A perfect correlation, a confession written in the language of the calendar. The fifth slide was titled Containment and Remediation. It was a simple three-point plan, an immediate independent forensic audit, full cooperation with any SEC inquiry, and the permanent dissolution of the vendor Stream 7 payment channel. The sixth and final slide was blank. It was a canvas for the decision they were about to make. I spoke for less than 10 minutes. I did not use adjectives. I did not offer opinions. I presented the data, the logs, the records. I was not an accuser. I was a narrator, telling a story that the numbers had already written. When I finished, a profound and heavy silence filled the room. The silence was broken by a man near the end of the table. He was one of the oldest shareholders, a man who had been investing in North Lake Meridian since before I was born. His voice was thin, reedy, but carried a weight of its own. "Miss Keene," he said, peering at me over his glasses. "Just one question." I turned to face him. "Yes, sir." "Were you afraid?" The question was not about the data, it was about me. It was the one variable my slides had not accounted for. The room was silent, waiting for my answer. I thought of the cold corridor, of Victor's face contorted with rage, of the long, lonely nights spent digging through the digital archives. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I was afraid." I paused, then looked from the shareholder back to the blank white screen. But the numbers weren't. Before anyone else could speak, a man sitting next to Helena leaned forward. He was the lead counsel from KPMG, the company's independent auditors, who had been working non-stop since receiving my files yesterday. For the official record, the lawyer stated, his voice a dry, factual drone, "Our preliminary review confirms Ms. Keene's findings. The evidence she has presented is credible, verifiable, and crosses the material threshold for a mandatory reportable event to the Securities and Exchange Commission. We have a legal and fiduciary duty to act on this information." The room absorbed the statement. My findings were now a legal obligation. Helena Voss nodded, her expression grim. "Thank you, counsel." She then addressed the room. "In light of these findings, I am putting a motion to the shareholders for an immediate vote. First, to formally suspend Victor Hale from his duties as Chief Operating Officer pending termination. Second, to dismiss Dion Graves from her position as Vice President of Finance, effective immediately. And third, to empower this committee to launch a full independent investigation with subpoena power into the activities of vendor Stream 7 and any related party transactions. She looked around the room. We will now vote. There was no show of hands. This was the digital age. On the screen behind Helena, a voting interface appeared. The motion was displayed, and beside it, 2 bars, one green for yay, one red for nay. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the green bar began to move. It was not a slow creep, it was a surge. Blocks of shareholder percentages representing millions of shares flashed onto the screen, instantly coloring the bar, 5%, 18%, 45%, 67%, 78%. The red barely moved. It sat at a pathetic, stubborn 3%. The final tally appeared in large white numbers, yeah, 86.4%, nay, 3.1%. Abstain, 10.5%. It was a landslide, a corporate execution. The door at the far end of the boardroom burst open. It was Victor. He was not supposed to be here. His access revoked, but he must have bullied some terrified junior security guard into letting him up. His face was a mask of disbelief and apoplectic rage. He was a king who had just walked into his own throne room to find it occupied by revolutionaries. "You fools," he bellowed, his voice echoing in the pristine white space. He pointed a shaking finger at the board members. "You're destroying this company. I built this company. You will all regret this." His eyes found me. The hatred in them was a physical force. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I looked back at him, my expression as calm and blank as the final slide of my presentation. "The caption is posted." "Victor," I said, my voice cutting through his rage, clear and cold. "We live with it now." Helena Voss picked up the small wooden gavel that sat before her, a ceremonial object that had not been used in years. She struck it once against its sound block. The sharp, definitive crack echoed through the room. "The motion is carried," she declared. "This decision is effective immediately." The king was dead. The numbers had spoken. I stepped out of the boardroom. The heavy door closed behind me with a soft hydraulic hiss, sealing the verdict within. The world inside that room had been stark white, a sterile environment for a clinical execution. The world outside, in the high, silent corridor, was made of glass and pale morning light. The city of Greyfield sprawled below us, a silent, sprawling map of a life I no longer recognized. She was there, my mother. Mara was leaning against the floor-to-ceiling glass railing, a solitary figure in a Chanel suit, her back to the boardroom door. She seemed to be studying the cityscape, but she wasn't. Her head was bowed over the phone clutched in her hands. The screen was bright, and even from a dozen feet away, I could recognize the image, our family, our lie. The post was still there, a digital scar on the face of the internet, its meaning now twisted into an epitaph. I walked toward her, my footsteps silent on the thick, sound-dampening carpet. She didn't look up until I was standing beside her, my own reflection, a dark, silent shape next to hers in the vast expanse of glass. The city hung beneath our feet, impossibly far away. For a long moment, we just stood there, two women separated by an invisible wall of choices. The silence wasn't empty, it was heavy, filled with the weight of years of unspoken words, of averted gazes, of truths too inconvenient to acknowledge. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was a fragile, barely there whisper, a sound that threatened to be carried away by the humming ventilation. "Nora, what was this for?" She didn't ask why I did it, she asked what it was for. A question of purpose, not of motive, as if my actions were a transaction, and she wanted to understand the price in the purchase. I kept my eyes on the city below, on the tiny ant-like cars moving in their orderly, predictable patterns. So no one could ever use the word family to hide violence and fraud again. The words hung in the air between us, stark and cold. I had handed her the truth, unadorned. I could feel her flinch beside me, a small, almost imperceptible tightening of her shoulders. She turned her head away, unable to meet my eyes in the reflection, her gaze fixed on some distant, hazy point on the horizon. "Victor," she breathed, her voice catching. "He's going to lose everything." There it was. Not anger at me, not concern for the truth, not shock at the crime. Her first, most immediate instinct was a lament for the perpetrator, for the man who had provided the lifestyle reflected in the sleek, expensive phone in her hand and the tailored suit on her back. He was the victim. I was the storm. A cold, weary resolve settled in my bones. I had spent a lifetime navigating the delicate ecosystem of my mother's denial. I had learned to speak in code, to soften the edges of reality, to protect her from the consequences of the choices she had made. But the time for that was over. The code was broken. Slowly, deliberately, I reached up and pushed back the sleeve of my blazer. I didn't say a word. I just turned my arm, exposing the inside of my forearm where I had braced my fall against the wall in the corridor. A dark, ugly bruise, a map of impact, was beginning to form. It was a mirror image of the one on my ribs, a secondary testament to the violence she refused to see. "He made sure I lost first," I said, my voice quiet, but stripped of all warmth. She saw it, her breath hitched, a sharp, ragged sound in the quiet corridor. Her eyes, wide and horrified, darted from the bruise on my arm to my face, and for the first time, she truly looked at me. She saw not the analyst, not the challenger, not the daughter. She saw the evidence, and in my eyes, she saw the reflection of her own long, silent complicity. Her composure, the carefully constructed facade she had worn for decades, finally shattered. Her face crumpled. A tear traced a path through her perfect makeup. Her throat worked, but no sound came out. Then, a single choked phrase escaped her lips, a ghostly echo of the night before, "Let's take photos." The sentence was broken, unfinished. Last night, it had been a command, a tool to create a lie. Now it was a sob, a confession of the lie itself. It was the only thing she could think to say. The last remnant of a world that no longer existed. I looked at her, at this woman who was my mother, a stranger trapped in a gilded cage of her own design. I felt a pang of something, not pity, but a profound and aching sadness for the person she might have been. I reached out and took her phone from her trembling hands. Her fingers were limp, offering no resistance. The screen still showed the post. The picture of the three of us. I looked at it, then back at her. "If you want a picture," I said softly, "let's take a real one." I held the phone out to her. It was an offering and a challenge, a chance to choose a different reality. Her hand, shaking violently now, rose to meet mine. She took the phone, her fingers fumbling with the smooth, cold device. She turned it around, the dark, blank screen facing us. She didn't know how to open the camera. Her world had always been one where others took the pictures for her. Gently, I reached out and guided her thumb to the right icon. The camera app opened, and the corridor, the city, and our two fractured reflections filled the screen. She raised the phone, her arm unsteady, trying to frame the shot. The lens reflected the two of us, standing side by side against the glass. There was an empty space beside me, a ghost of a presence that was no longer there. The composition was stark, honest, and devastating. Her thumb hovered over the shutter button, but she couldn't press it. Her whole body was trembling. I reached over, my hand covering hers, my finger pressing down on her thumb. The shutter clicked. A soft, final sound that captured the image. A new picture, a new truth, a frame that no longer held a lie. Just as the image saved to the screen, a soft, polite chime sounded from the pocket of my blazer. It was my own phone, a calendar reminder. I pulled it out. The notification was simple, clear, and unavoidable: press conference. Main atrium. 3 minutes. The moment was over. The personal had ended. The professional was waiting. I left my mother and her new truthful photograph in the silent glass corridor. I didn't look back. The path to the main atrium was a series of long, empty hallways, my footsteps echoing in the unnatural quiet of a corporation holding its breath. 2 members of Helena's staff met me at the final turn. They didn't speak. One simply held open the heavy door that led backstage, while the other handed me a small tablet. On its screen was a single prominent button labeled Submit. The final payload. The complete, unredacted whistleblower package for the independent auditors was queued and ready. The final publish was mine to command. I walked past them, out from the shadows of the wings and into the blinding white light. The atrium, which 2 nights ago had been a glittering ballroom of self-congratulation, was now a press theater. The champagne fountains were gone. Replaced by a forest of tripods, cameras, and microphones. Every major news outlet was here. A sea of expectant, hungry faces turned toward the simple black podium that had been erected in the center of the vast marble floor. The light was hot and unforgiving. The air was thick with the scent of electronics and anticipation. I walked to the podium. My steps were steady. The bruise on my side was a dull, rhythmic ache, a private metronome counting down the final seconds. I placed the tablet on the lectern and looked out at the crowd. Behind me, a vast LED screen, the same one that had displayed North Lake's triumphant 40th anniversary logo, now glowed with a neutral, empty blue. I gripped the sides of the lectern. In front of me, a cluster of microphones, each bearing the logo of a different network, pointed at me like a bouquet of weapons. One in the very center had a small single red light. It was on. The world was listening. I didn't have a prepared statement. The truth didn't require a script. A reporter from the front row, a man whose face I recognized from the nightly financial news, spoke first, his voice sharp and loud, designed to cut through the noise. Ms. Keane, Nora, do you have a statement for the Hale family? The question was a trap. It was an invitation to make this personal, to reduce the systemic corporate fraud, the legal violations, the physical assault into a domestic squabble. They wanted tears. They wanted anger. They wanted a family drama they could sell. I let the question hang in the air for a beat, letting the silence amplify it. I thought of all the possible answers, the long, detailed explanation of his crimes, the emotional description of his betrayal, the angry condemnation of his violence. I discarded them all. They were my story, my pain. But they were not the point. The point was the data. The point was the truth. I leaned forward, my mouth close to the microphones. I looked directly into the lens of the center camera, at the single red light that was my connection to the entire world. We already posted it, I said. My voice, clear and cold, echoed through the cavernous space. It was not an answer to his question, it was a rejection of its premise. As I spoke the words, I reached over and tapped the screen of the tablet beside me. Behind me, the massive blue screen changed. It was now filled with a single, stark image. The social media post, the wide-angled photo of the gala with the dark reflection of the corridor in the marble, and beneath it, the caption, now feeling less like a sentence, and more like a verdict. Integrity means telling the truth when the camera turns away. A wave of motion went through the press corps, as they all turned to see the screen. Their own cameras now pointed at the evidence. The room filled with the frantic clicking of 100 shutters. At that moment, a side door, a service entrance near the far wall of the atrium, opened. 2 uniformed North Lake security guards stepped out. Between them was Victor Hale. He was not in handcuffs. He was not being dragged. His face was a mask of grey, empty shock. This was not an arrest. It was a procedure, an executive being escorted from the premises, a quiet, bureaucratic, and utterly humiliating removal. He looked small and old under the vast, vaulted ceilings of the empire he had built and lost. He did not look at me. He did not look at the press. He stared at the floor as they guided him silently toward a back exit, a ghost being exorcised from his own machine. I watched him disappear. Then I looked down at the tablet in front of me. The button was still there, glowing softly. Submit. This was the last step, the final, irrevocable act that would move the full, detailed truth from my possession into the unalterable public record, arming the auditors with everything they needed. It was the final publish. My finger moved over the cool glass screen and pressed the button. A small animation played, a check mark. Secure package transmitted to independent auditors. Receipt confirmed. It was done. The numbers were free. From the corner of my eye, I saw a flicker of movement in the shadows of the wings from which I had just emerged. It was Mara. She was standing just out of sight of the press, hidden behind a large black curtain. She was no longer crying. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. She was clutching her phone to her chest with both hands, holding it like a prayer book. The phone with our real picture on it. She stood there, a silent witness to the end of one world and the beginning of another. The sound in the room was deafening now. It was not the sound of questions being shouted, it was only one sound, multiplied 1,000 times, the sound of camera shutters. A relentless, percussive, overwhelming storm of clicks. Each one capturing a piece of the story. Each one an echo of the flash that had started it all in a moment of feigned family unity. It was the sound of the narrative being permanently, irrevocably recorded. I had said nothing, and I had said everything. I took my hands off the lectern. I leaned back from the microphones, breaking the connection. The story was told. The job was done. The end. The end.